what are the steps that someone can take to create their personal brand?
The best advice is to start and put yourself out there, because I was there 8 months ago, and the idea of posting and exposing myself and just being visible to the entire digital world was quite intimidating. And I would say, go out there, because everyone has a story. Everyone has value. Everyone has learned something that other people are interested in.
What's your number one lesson?
1 in 8 billion. That's how special you are. There's only one you, with your personality, with your skills, with your traits, with your passions, and that's really your value. So that's where you have to start your journey, is by really knowing who you are, but also embracing it. And I use the term superpower because I love people to think that they have a superpower. Maybe they haven't found it yet, or maybe it needs a little bit of polishing, but that's how my book starts. I'm all about diversity, and I'm all about people really being who they are rather than trying to fit someone else's profile.
What is a one life lesson that you will tell younger self?
It comes from Steve Jobs. It always gives me a lot of peace of mind. Even if you feel really lost, even if you don't know the answer now, in the future, looking back, you're going to connect the dots. At the time when I was in Australia and I was trying to find my way, I couldn't really see where this was going. I felt that I fell off the corporate ladder, so I saw it as something very negative. And now, when I'm looking back, I was like, wow, it all makes sense. I've connected the dots. It was all supposed to happen. I'm just closing the loop now. So I think this idea of connecting the dots is definitely something that I would tell my younger self. Don't worry. Do your journey, make your mistakes, learn, grow.
We keep trying to rationalize things when we are in this irrational journey, like you said. But often it's easier said than done. Hey guys, thank you so much for following this channel and making our podcast into the top 3% global podcast ranking. When I started a year ago, I didn't think anyone would listen to this podcast, but it was you who made this a success. Now, before you watch the full video, please do me a small favor. Please hit the subscribe button to help me understand a bit more about your experiences and how we can improve our contents. In every video, I have a deep conversation with someone whom I've recently met. We talked about different topics, including mental health, mindset, entrepreneurship, career, and most importantly, their stories on how they transform themselves from the younger self. I hope these conversations are useful to you and can bring you new perspectives. Please enjoy. Hey guys, welcome back to the new episode on Transformative Purpose. I'm quite excited about today's episode because I'm speaking with someone who I've never met, but it feels like I've known this person for a very long time because I constantly see her interesting articles and contents popping up on my LinkedIn feed. Veronica Smith, welcome back to Hong Kong. I know you guys been away for a year or so during COVID. How's life now?
It's great to be back. So to give a little bit of context, I was living in Hong Kong for 15 years when one day I went on holidays with my 2 daughters and a purple suitcase. We went to Spain to visit my family, and boom, all of a sudden Hong Kong changed the policy and the quarantine regulations. And so we were stuck abroad. So we were in Spain and Australia for almost a year and a half. So as you can imagine, it feels great to go back. I was separated from my husband during that time, so it's great to be reunited, to have our dog, to have our home, our girls' bedroom, which is where I am right now. So it feels really wonderful.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of challenges for you guys. So you and your husband have been living apart for 1.5 years during COVID.
Exactly. Yes, we managed to see each other every 4 months or so, but it was a long period. And actually, my youngest at the time, she was 3. She forgot to speak English because we were in Spain for 3 months. And when her daddy saw her again, she was speaking in Spanish and he was speaking in English. So it was challenging for the family. Yes.
Yeah, but the also the kids must have had a great time though. No schools, a lot of travels, seeing new things, right?
Oh, for that,
outside of Hong Kong.
Yes, it was an amazing experience. So in 1 year, they had 3 school starts. So they started the school year in Hong Kong, and then they went to public school in Spain when I was there in the Canary Islands. And then they were in Australia. So in one school term, they had 3 starts, 3 school bells, 3 playgrounds. It was all a lot of excitement for them.
Hey, so Veronica, when I was going through your CV or your career history on LinkedIn, you had many interesting jobs. You spent almost 10 years at Apple, 7 years to be exact, and then another 3 years at Estee Lauder. And now you're doing your own gig, you're creating your own content, which are very inspiring. Just want to understand from your perspective, how was the transition for you? And what advice would you give to other people who might be going through the same thing?
Absolutely. So, yes, you explained my career path really well. I thought that was the corporate ladder for me, and that was my path. And then, because I was in this situation where I was in a new country, in Australia, I was trying to find a job, and I just wasn't getting the response and the success that I thought I would, to be very honest. And I started to realize that really what I was missing were two big things. And the first one is that I had never really had my personal brand. I had always relied on all the big brands like Apple or Estee Lauder. And so people were coming to me because I was an extension of that brand. But in reality, I didn't really have my personal brand. And so the moment that I was not there, it was like, there's no brand. So that was first moment of realization. The second one was, in my case, being in Australia, I didn't have a network. I had a great network in Hong Kong because I had been here, worked here for 15 years, but I didn't have that network in Australia. And so I had this light bulb that I like to call the lemon tree mindset, which is when life gives you lemon, in English we say you make lemonade. And I was like, actually, no, you don't make lemonade. You use the seeds to plant your own lemon tree. And so that's what I call the lemon tree mindset. And that's the name of my book, my ebook that I just published on Amazon as well. And for me, the solution was very clear. It was like, well, if you don't have a personal brand, you go out there and you build one. And you build a personal brand based on your value, based on your diversity, based on who you are as an individual, your skills, your personality, and all of that. So that was number one, like really build your personal brand. And then number two was go out there and create your network, because the reality is no one is going to come and knock at your door. And you have to go out there, digital world, in the personal world, and start to build your network. And so I focus on these two things, start building my personal brand and build my network. And of course, these go hand in hand in the digital world. As you're creating content, you are developing new relationships and building your network. And as you're building more network, then people are able to see more and more of your value. So it's like this synergy or this ecosystem between these two parts. So the personal brand.
Let's talk about the transition. You mentioned that you and your husband lived apart for a year and a half, and you were traveling, with two girls. And, you're not getting any luck with the traditional corporate path. How difficult or how easy was the transition for you?
Honestly, it was very difficult because it was not a transition that I had planned. I would love to tell you the story that after 15 years, I thought, okay, now I'm going to start my new adventure. And it's something that I always wanted to do. No, it was completely accidental. But at the same time, it was one of these cases where you turn a challenge into an opportunity, because the fact that I didn't find this opportunity to continue in the corporate world, it meant that I had to look in different directions. And for me, I was like, actually, maybe I was in the tunnel, but looking at the wrong direction of the tunnel, because was the corporate life, especially at that point in time with two young children by myself in a new country, was that really the direction that I had to look at? And then I was like, actually, if I look at a different direction, opposite direction, there's a freelance world, there are opportunities, I can create different incomes. And so for me, it was a difficult transition because I had to completely reset my mindset and really start to looking into a different direction, which is really hard, especially when it's not intentional. And so it was a process. For me, the transition was really a process on getting through that rejection period, reframing everything, the way that I looked at career, the way that I looked at how to monetize your value, and then totally embracing the lifestyle that comes with being a freelancer, with having different jobs or different hats, with also the instability, because of course it's not as stable as it is when I had my paycheck at the end of the month at Apple, but I take it. It's been
I don't think I'll be able to cope as well as you. If I were trapped in a new country with two of my boys, I think that would drive me nuts. But I really love everything that you said, right? Just looking at reframing our mind, and just by shifting our mindset, a lot of the times we can shift a challenge into an opportunity. And one of my mentors, he used to have this favorite saying, and I think you also had a similar proverb when you mentioned your lemon tree analogy. And the proverb that my mentor used to like to say is, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, but the next best time is now. So I think, in a way, I think it's similar to what you share, right? So for people who haven't thought about, creating their personal brand, right? Where should they start? You mentioned about values, putting yourself out there, networking with new people, right? But what are the steps that someone can take to create their personal brand? And I know that you're also posting many interesting contents quite consistently in various platforms, right? What are some of the lessons you learned, and which ones work for you?
Sure. So I think the best advice is to start and put yourself out there, because I was there 8 months ago, and the idea of posting and exposing myself and just being visible to the entire digital world was quite intimidating. And I would say go out there, because everyone has a story. Everyone has value. Everyone has learned something that other people are interested in. And so also reframing that and getting rid of all this imposter syndrome that very often is there haunting us. Like, for example, my story is not that interesting, or I'm not an expert on this field, or what are people going to think and say? So I think trying to get rid of all of these conditioners that are acting as an obstacle. I think that's the first thing that I would say. Also, something that works really well, it worked for me and for many creators, is if you're not ready to start posting, you can definitely start engaging and commenting. And that's a strategy that works really well. So in my case, for example, my field is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I follow a lot of creators, a lot of leaders in that field. And what I do is whenever they create content, I engage with what they're talking about. I engage with their own audience, so that slowly you start to build that network. So I think that works really well for people who are maybe not ready to put themselves out there yet. But just to give a very specific example, I believe that Aaron, you and I, that's how we connected. You started to write a lot about writing your book, and congratulations. I know that you just published as well your third book called
yes,
Unstuck.
It is indeed.
Right? Yes, and I thought it was really interesting that I saw someone who is also a dad, a parent, similar age, in Hong Kong. I saw that you also had your transition, that this was your third book, I believe. And so I started to engage with your content because I was also publishing, and I was interested in building my network with people in that same industry with similar knowledge. So it's a very tangible example on how you can start to create this network in a very organic way. It's just, I love that you published a book. I'm also in my journey towards publishing my first ebook. And I think when you put it in these terms with a very specific example, you demystify it for people who are like, creating a personal brand. I'm not a creator. I'm not an influencer. That's something that stops people. So just take the way that you build relationships in the normal life or the real life into the digital world, and the opportunities are amazing because there's so many creators across so many different industries. So I think that would be my advice to sum it up. Get rid of all your imposter syndrome and just start somewhere. And if you want to kind of start like a softer, just start to engage with people that you're genuinely interested in what they write about.
You hit a lot of great points there. I think a lot of the thoughts and sharing that you just made, and they were like a great summary of how I used to feel before putting myself out there. My story is not that interesting. Who cares what I think? Who cares what I write about, right? But then once I started writing, I realized that writing is not so much about you. Writing is about, how you can add value to other people's life, how you can actually be relevant to other people. And writing itself can actually be an incredible feedback loop to your own self-growth as well, because I think we need to give permission to other people to have an opinion on us. But it's up to us how we want to react to those opinions. And some opinions can actually be great learning opportunities for us. And just to share a backstory with you, I had a rejection from my wife actually about a month ago, and she went to me, I stopped following you. Your content is so boring. It's all about this life lesson. And when she mentioned that to me, I got a bit taken aback. But then I processed her feedback and I started thinking about my younger self, my 20-year-old self. And then I remember, oh yeah, I remember, there were people in my life back then trying to tell me all these big life lessons, seize your opportunity, life's not forever, just, all that kind of big stuff. But I wasn't ready for those life lessons. Then it came to me, some life experiences, some life lessons need to be experienced, and we need to be more relevant to different audiences, to people from different life ages. And I shouldn't be discriminating people without kids. I should be talking, in their languages, something that they can absorb. So based off on that feedback, I started writing a bit more of other content. So I started posting things about, career, what mistakes I've learned from my younger self, all that kind of stuff. But so I just want to say, your sharing just now really, really resonated with me. And like I said, once you put yourself out there, rejections are actually not that scary. You get used to it. I used to work in a call center, and people used to swear at me like whenever I made this like random phone calls when people were having dinner and lunches at very inconvenient hours. Let's talk about monetization, right? So we talked a little bit about transitioning from your corporate career into a sort of a freelancing career, building up your personal brand, and then starting to make a bit more networks and building up your own contents, right? How do you make money, or how does someone make money? And how should someone look at that aspect, right? Because it's not easy. I mean, it is a red ocean there. There are a lot of content creators with many interesting contents. We look at YouTube, for example. If someone were to make a video today and try to compete with the traditional YouTuber, they need to put in a lot of investment, their time and their contents, right? How can people find their own niche?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I think a lot of people ask themselves the same question. I certainly did, and I still do. So I'm going to start by going a little bit broader, and then I'll bring it back into my specific example. But if you start broader, I think the main thing is to identify what is your value. What is your value? I like to talk about the knowledge gap because I think it can relate to people. A lot of people think that they can only monetize something if they are the top expert in a field. The reality is there is a knowledge gap. The moment you know something, even if it's this much, there is someone who is below in the journey. And that knowledge gap can be monetized. So, for example, in my case, I've only been doing personal branding for 8 months and not even professionally. What I mean is posting, creating content and so on. At the beginning, I was pitching to podcasts. Now I'm at a point where podcasts pitch to me like you did, for example, right? So it's all a journey. But I think the first thing is really focusing on the value that you can provide. And then once you're clear on what is your knowledge gap, then you can start to monetize it. So let's bring it more specific into what I mean. I went through this reinvention last year. And for me, the reinvention took around 3 months until I was a freelancer. I had several streams of income and so on. What I realized is that through my journey of transformation, I was ahead of some people who had lost their jobs, or maybe they had been out of the corporate environment for a while. And a lot of people kept asking me, how did you do it? Like same question you asked me, you were in the corporate world for so many years and now you reinvented yourself, you're a freelancer. I would love to do that, but I don't know where to get started. I don't know how to start creating content. That was the seed for me to create my first book, which is the Lemon Tree Mindset, where I wouldn't have been able to write that 6 months ago because I hadn't been through that experience. But I had the knowledge gap. Because I had been through that experience, I started creating content on LinkedIn. I started to create content on Medium, which is a writing platform. I started to speak in podcasts. I got my first freelance opportunities. The book is exactly about that. Is exactly about what are the 19 lessons that I learned through my transformation period that can help other people. And so for me, that's a very specific example on how you have a little knowledge gap, because I've only been here doing this for 8 months now, but I was able to transform it or to convert it into an ebook that I published last month in Amazon. And I had no idea how to Google, how do you publish an ebook on Amazon? But I think that can bring it down to people. that this is my example. But for example, if you are a student who just finished university and 6 months later you land a top job at Google, for example, there are people who would love to know, what did you do? What was that interview process like? What would you recommend? So there you go. You can have a tutorial, or you can have an ebook that would be super relevant for young graduates who would love to land a job at Google. And that person has that little knowledge gap that can be monetized. So I hope with these examples, it really helps people to start broader, like what is my value? What is my knowledge gap? And how do I transform this into value? For whom? I think understanding who you're talking to is very relevant. I'm not talking to the top influencers on LinkedIn about how to create content. My audience is someone who is 6 months behind, who has not started, who is going through the imposter syndrome, through all these trials and rejections. So I think that's really important to know who your target audience is.
I really love that concept, that knowledge gap concept. So there's this pool of people out there who are suffering, who are going through the same journey that you just went through, right? How do you find these people?
So, to be honest, it's almost like they find me. When I started to create content, I had no idea that I was going to write an ebook. But very often, especially at the beginning of my journey posting on LinkedIn, I would write things like, I used to be unemployed and now I'm a freelancer, or things about the reinvention journey. And a lot of comments were like, oh, this is amazing. I'm so inspired. A lot of people would actually private message, because it's something very private, to say, oh, I really relate to this. I'm going through something similar myself. And I was receiving like these messages that a lot of people were lost. A lot of people were not happy in their 9 to 5, which is never 9 to 5, by the way. A lot of people had children that they barely saw, because in Hong Kong, for example, you finish work at 6 p.m. if you're lucky. Get home is almost 7 p.m. And so I was receiving all these comments, questions, connections about people who were really relating to my story. Also because in my case, and you've seen my content, I'm very open about sharing. There's a lot of storytelling, so that is very relatable to people. So I didn't go out there and say, okay, who needs this reinvention? It was more my audience, and that's what happens when you create content. People come to you. Like, for example, Aaron, you write a lot about writing a book. A lot of people ask you questions. So where should you publish? Do you go for self-publish, or do you find a publisher? What tips do you have to get testimonials? I saw that you had amazing testimonials in your book. So one of my questions would be like, oh, how do you get all these amazing reviews? And so my point is that very often the signs are there. You just have to be receptive and listen to your audience. And you can only do that if you start creating content, because otherwise people are not going to come to you.
On the way. And the way I see it is, a mistake is just part of the learning. And whether you see it as mistake or as an opportunity to learn more, it's just a matter of reframing, like you said earlier, right? So you mentioned about 19 lessons in your book. What's your number one lesson that you think everyone should know of going through this transition?
So the number one lesson is a post that I wrote that resonated with a lot of people. And the title was 1 in 8 billion. That's how special you are. So that's how the book starts, with this idea that there's only one you, with your personality, with your skills, with your traits, with your passions, and that's really your values. So that's where you have to start your journey, is by really knowing who you are, but also embracing it. And I use the term superpower because I love people to think that they have a superpower. Maybe they haven't found it yet, or maybe it needs a little bit of polishing, but that's how my book starts. I'm all about diversity, and I'm all about people really being who they are rather than trying to fit someone else's profile. So that's the very first lesson. 1 in 8 billion. That's how special you are.
But please correct me if I'm wrong here. I remember some of your superpowers. You speak 8 languages. You are a CEM, which is a Chief Executive Mom. I like to call myself CED, Chief Executive Dad, or CDO, Chief Daddy Officer.
Love it. Yes, well, I'm going to be disappointed. It's not 8 languages,
something
it's 6.
Like that?
So sorry to disappoint. I have to do. Yes, enough. I lived in 9 countries. That's right. Yeah. So for me, these are some of the superpowers. And in my profile in LinkedIn, I love to write a Chief Executive Mom, because it's also part of who I am. Like, if I take that out, people don't really see the whole of me. And so I did a lot of work also on how I position myself. How do I want to be seen? In the past, I just wanted to be seen as this executive woman who is in the corporate world. And I was like, no, that's not, it's a part of who I was, not anymore. But I want people to also see that I'm a triathlete, that I'm a mom, that I have these different interests outside what you just do for a living.
When was the first time you became vulnerable? When was the first time you decided to, hit that submit button and share your personal story?
Well, it wasn't an actual button. So I clicked post on my very first post on LinkedIn, and I remember it because it said, SOS, my life turned upside down. That was the title of the post. And the post was basically me saying, in 2022, this happened. I was separated from my husband. I lost my job. I ended up in a new country where I don't have any friends. And then the second part of the post, but also in 2022, I started writing. I started reaching out to people. I started taking a lot of courses. I've spent more quality time with my kids than I ever had. And for me, it was literally, I pressed that button and it was like, okay, I'm opening this door of vulnerability. And people really related. Like, that's one advice that I would give. Like, when you're truly yourself, people relate much more than if you just show success, because success is very aspirational, but not so inspirational, because it's like, yeah, I would like to be like you, but I don't know how. Whereas when you're opening up, people see actually there's a lot of hills, there's a lot of ups and downs.
Social media can also cause some anxiety. And I remember one of your posts or two of your posts were about haters, right? How do you deal with online haters that just not giving you or giving people constructive criticism or feedback?
That's such a good question, Aaron. So in my journey, probably because I haven't been that long and I'm not that popular, let's say, or I don't have like thousands and thousands of followers, I've only had a couple of cases, I think two or three maybe. The first one was very interesting because it was the same day I reached 1,000 followers on Medium. I was very excited. I posted about it, and then I had the very first digital bully, and it was harsh. Like, it was like swearing and not just criticizing. It was beyond. And I know that the advice that everybody gives is just block that person. You don't need that energy, and it's definitely the advice that I would give as well. But in this case, I just decided to put the phone aside. I just decided, okay, I'm not going to do anything while it's still hot in my mind. I just wanted to have the time to process it. And after going for a run, which is usually when I find my inspiration, because it was the day when I reached my 1,000 followers and my initial post was going to be about celebration, which is what I wanted to do, I created a post talking about how when you're successful, you're always going to attract haters. And I actually thanked this man for showing this like really dark side of him. And I invited him to join my publication, which is called A Smiling World on Medium. And it's about positive messages and self-improvement, because I said, well, I think you actually need some of that. I'm not going to take your rage. I'm not going to take, your negativity, but I have a fantastic positive publication that I think would help you very much. And so I turned this into a post that went quite viral on Medium. And it's not something that I would recommend everybody to do. It definitely helped me. It was a one-off. But whenever I have had that, I have taken the approach of, I'm going to block that person from my network, because I don't need to get into debates. I don't need to have that negativity in my life. I'm a very positive person and very attracted to a positive person as well. So I think you block that person, but mentally it can hit you. So I would just say my same message in the post, that was like, the more successful you are, the more you're going to trigger this type of, it's a numbers game. If I reach 1,000, now I'm over 2,500, probably when I reach 10,000, I will have 10 of them. And just knowing that it's part of the journey is a way of saying, okay, I'm not even going to take this personal. It's just, unfortunately, how very often the digital world happens, because it's very easy to be a digital warrior, behind
and sometimes it's
the keyboard.
Easier for us to remove that negative cue from our life, right? Instead of trying to manage around it. And like you said, with one of your favorite lessons, there's 8 million of us on this planet, which also means that there's 8 million different permutations of us. Everyone thinks differently. react to things differently. So we can't please everyone. No, great advice there. Thank you. So what's next? What's next for you this year? What's on your calendar this year? What can we expect to see more of from Veronica?
So what I'm trying to do is try to do less, because I'm in a lot of different things at the same time. So I'm trying to focus. And the big project for this year, and I think you're going to love this, is my first book. So paper book. I'm working with a mentor. I've been working with her for already 6 months to publish my first official book. I did an ebook, but it was smaller. So my dream is really to have that out, published in a cover book by the end of this year. So that's definitely something that is like top priority for me. And in terms of short term, I just literally launched my newsletter on Substack 3 weeks ago, not even 3 weeks ago. So that's something that I'm also working on. I would say that personal branding is it's like almost like a career where you're going through different phases. So now that I've established myself, I know how to create content. I'm quite established in 2 platforms, in LinkedIn and Medium. I really wanted to start working on building my audience, which is really the next step. And a newsletter, I think, is critical for that, because you have to build your email list. So that's something that I'm putting a lot of focus as well on growing my audience and going from a more awareness, more generic followers to subscribers who are people who are genuinely interested in what you do, in what you publish. So it's a bit of a
I've got
more
one last
targeted
question
audience
for you, Veronica. And this question comes from the previous podcast guest, Emmy. I actually haven't published her episode yet, so you can't find it yet. But she had a bit of a quarter life crisis at the age of 30. And she turned her career from a biomedical engineer into a worldwide record holder in weightlifting. So pretty impressive. So if you have time, do check out the episode, and that should come up probably next week or so. But so her question to you is, what is a one life lesson that you will tell younger self?
The one lesson that I will tell my younger self is, it comes from Steve Jobs. And it always gives me a lot of peace of mind. And is that even if you feel really lost, even if you don't know the answer now, in the future, looking back, you're going to connect the dots. And in my case, it's very relevant, because at the time when I was in Australia and I was trying to find my way, I couldn't really see where this was going. I felt that I fell off the corporate ladder. So I saw it as something very negative. And now when I'm looking back, I was like, wow, it all makes sense. I've connected the dots. It was all supposed to happen. I'm just closing the loop now. So I think this idea of connecting the dots is definitely something that I would tell my younger self. Don't worry. Do your journey, make your mistakes, learn, grow. Everything will make sense.
And I think that's the limitation of our rational mind, right? We keep trying to rationalize things when we are in this irrational journey, like you said. But often it's easier said than done. And one question from you, Veronica, what's the one question you want to ask the next guest? And anything.
So where would you like to see yourself in 5 years?
Okay, I shall let him or her know once I know who that person is. All right. Thank you so much for having you, Veronica. And it's been great, very inspirational. And like I said, even though we haven't met in person yet, I'm sure we'll get a chance, because now that you and your family are back, we can set up some play dates with the kids even. It just feels like I've known you for such a long time, because I see your interesting contents on LinkedIn. So for all the followers of this podcast, there's a newsletter you can check out for Veronica.
Thank you.
She's super active on LinkedIn, and she also recently published her first book on Amazon as well, which you can buy. So again, thank you so much for your time. I wish you a lovely day, and say hi to the family for me. Ciao.
Thank you, Aaron. See you soon.